Hello, welcome again to What If Natives Won, a video blog and channel about alternate history and American Indians, Native Americans, indigenous peoples. This is the second video of over 24 planned ones, and this is part 1 of 3 because the topic is fairly long. My name is Carroll. I'm Associate Professor of History at Northern Virginia Community College. I teach American, American Indian, and Latin American history. I've written mostly about wars, veterans, human rights, and genocide. I'm also, together with Rob Schmidt of Blue Corn Comics, editing and putting out a short story anthology, What If Natives Won? This is what this video, blog, and channel are all about. There's a huge lack of alternate history written about American Indians and indigenous people. Many people don't like to think about genocides in America. They are in denial. They likely were never taught about these genocides. This is too disturbing or depressing for them. Many of them don't want to be reminded their ancestors were foreign to this land and invaded, killed, and cheated to get the land they now live on. So they want to believe these genocides never happened, or they want to believe that what happened was all or mostly an accident instead of deliberate. This is their way of feeling less guilty about benefiting from tragedy and atrocities. They also often would like to pretend that invasions, genocides, and land theft were inevitable. This is what this video blog and channel will be all about. I've had great success using alternate history to teach my students, show them that absolutely nothing in history was inevitable. It never had to be. The worst of human history is always a conscious choice. How things turn out is based on how evil the evil choose to be, and how well and how strongly good people choose to stand up to them or stop them. The way things turned out in world history took a very specific set of circumstances. Sometimes history can turn on very small things. Change even one, and you have an entirely different history, different present, different society. Today we talk about what if others colonize the Americas. If almost literally anyone else colonizes and invades instead of those Europeans who did, native people and the world are far better off. It may be hard for European ancestry people to hear this, but we live right now in a dystopian world, one of the worst of all possible outcomes for anyone who is not just white, but wealthy and white. America is today 98% non-native. At least 75 to 112 million natives were killed by not one genocide, but a series of genocides. Columbus's invasion was the first genocide, killing up to 8 million Taino people by mass murder, torture, enslavement, deliberate starvation, and deliberate spread of disease, not accidental. Then you had mass killings by Cortez, by Pizarro, by British smallpox blankets, the Trail of Tears, ethnic cleansing in Texas, California Indian genocide, cultural genocide, forced adoption, forced sterilization, all the way to the 1990s. On top of that is the massive genocide denial, but this is not taught in almost all American schools and many universities. What is often taught about natives is false, and there are racist images everywhere that are often not admitted to be racist. From everyday products like Land O'Lakes butter, to Red Man chewing tobacco, to thousands of racist sports mascots, team names, and mascots, to celebrations of mass murderers of natives like Columbus, Jackson, and Reagan, to white actors and music stars playing natives. To imagine just how pervasive genocide denial is in America, imagine if the Nazis had won. Imagine also if German schools never taught about it, if only Jews and historians knew about the Holocaust. Imagine also if Germany had Hitler, Himmler, Goering, or Eichmann holidays, and if people justified it by saying it was all an accident. Imagine if they taught it was justified because Jews are savages, primitives, inferior. Or if they claimed to be admiring and honoring Jews by naming German sports teams after them, and if Germans dressed up like stereotypes of Jews for Halloween. But all of this could change if others come to the Americas. This video will look at 2 possibilities, Muslim Spain and the Ottoman Empire. Next 2 videos we will look at what if the colonization invasion had been by the Chola Empire of India, by Moor Vikings, by the Mali Empire of West Africa, or a Chinese empire. What if Muslim traders from Spain had colonized the Americas in the 900s? These would be from Al-Andalus, for a time called the Caliphate of Cordoba. The Umayyad Caliphate began conquering what became Spain in the 700s. By 1000, they had conquered nearly all of it. This was a long pattern of conquest and reform by Muslim states, all the way back to when Muhammad himself led armies. Muslims conquered the Mideast and North Africa and Spain not just because they were better soldiers, had better tactics, and believed strongly in their faith and their cause. Muhammad also carried out a series of reforms that won over local people and converted many of them. It explicitly says in the Quran, no killing children, or women, or elderly, or monks, or nuns. No harm to crops or flocks of animals. No poisons, no unnecessary harm, no torture. Treat well Christians and Jews, for they are fellow people of the book. The later hostility between Christians and Muslims mostly begins in the Crusades. Between Muslims and Jews, it mostly begins with the start of the modern state of Israel. The Quran explicitly says, no bombing buildings, no infanticide, women can inherit property, children are no longer their father's property, and slaves have clear rights to food, rest, shelter, medicine, and they are punished less than free people. Free people are more rarely enslaved under Islam. You must give to charity as a thanksgiving to God. Water is a public good. The wealthy must give 10% of their income and 2.5% of all their wealth every year. Now, all of this doesn't mean, obviously, that there's no such thing as intolerance or bigotry among Muslims, that there were not cruel or harsh rulers. There are tolerant and intolerant forms of the faith. There are hypocritical or power-hungry rulers and brutal states under Islam as well. But the Caliphate of Cordoba was tolerant. Jews were 1/10 of the population. Christians were almost 2/5, and there were many prosperous Jewish tradesmen and artisans. Intermarriage among the faiths and among different ethnic groups was very common. The nation had Berbers, Arabs, Sephardic Jews, and local European Catholics. Only half the people of Spain, when it was under Muslim control, were actually Muslim. Cordoba and North African ships were easily the equal of anything in Europe. The best known were the Barbary pirates, starting in the 9th century. These ships were fast-moving, maneuverable, with good navigation. According to the Book of Golden Meadows, sometimes called the Field of Gold and Mines of Jewels, Kishkash ibn Said from Cordoba sailed west in 889 CE or AD. We don't know if he actually did. Most historians call this source unproven. If he did, and then returned successfully, this may be the start of colonization or conquest of the Americas by Muslim Spain. And natives are far better under this Muslim power than under European Christian conquest and genocide by Spain and later France and England. We could expect there would be efforts to win natives to the Muslim faith, mostly by missionaries, plus trade and warfare, but not genocide, not the multiple genocides Europeans carried out. The death toll would be in the tens or hundreds of thousands, compared to the tens of millions killed by Spaniards, French, English, and later on by the US, Brazil, Argentina, and other colonial descendant states. What about disease? Muslim caliphates didn't use biological warfare the way the English did under Lord Amherst, or American fur traders did versus Plains tribes in the 1830s. They also didn't bring epidemics to the places they conquered because they practiced better hygiene. Also, Europeans practiced deliberate starvation that made natives much more vulnerable to disease. North Africans, Arabs, and Berbers did not do that in Spain. There would be some limited deaths from disease under a Muslim invasion, but natives would have immunity by the time other Europeans invade later. Muslim Spain was finally reconquered by Europeans in 1492. Would that still happen? Invasion and exploitation of the Americas made Spain incredibly wealthy. Gold and silver from Mexico and Peru fueled the rise of capitalism in Europe. It's possible the huge boost to their economy means Muslim Spain doesn't fall. Modern Spain stays Muslim. Other Muslim nations like the Berbers and other caliphs join the invasion and have their own colonies in America. It may be that no European powers ever become world powers at all. But if Muslim Spain is still reconquered, despite its new wealth, then European nations still invade the Americas, but they would face natives who now have immunity to the diseases they spread. And these natives also have guns and armors about or almost equal to the European ones. Europeans still might conquer the Americas. They did in our own time also conquer Africa, the Mideast, and much of Asia, but it took much longer. Ethiopia wasn't conquered until the 1930s, and it was an incomplete conquest. Japan and Thailand were never conquered by European powers. And Europeans were kicked out of everywhere, except some small islands, by the 1970s. The Americas would likely still be colonized by Europeans and exploited, and there would be mass enslavement of natives, just like in our own time. But just like today, Africa and Asia are almost all African and Asian peoples. The Americas would too also be and remain mostly native, almost entirely native. I count that as a native victory. Many native nations, with almost all native peoples, becoming independent by the late 20th century. What if a different Muslim power had colonized instead? What if the Ottoman Empire had? Muhammad al-Idrisi was supposed to have traveled west in the year 1154, and Rakesh al-Aouz was supposed to have sailed west in 1325. Both of these are according to the Book of Pleasant Journeys to Faraway Lands, also called Him Who Longs to Cross Horizons. What if instead Muslim Spain, it had been the Ottoman Empire that sails west and that colonizes and conquers? Now this empire was around from 1300 all the way to 1922. They controlled Turkey, most of North Africa, Iraq, Arabia, and the Balkans. They were a great naval power in the Mediterranean, in the Indian Ocean, and all the way to Aceh, in what is today Indonesia. In Transylvania, there was invasion that was only halted by Vlad Tepes, better known as the character that Dracula was based on. But unlike Muslim Spain, the Ottomans were intolerant. In this empire, non-Muslims were considered inferior. They were kept segregated, and they had to wear special clothing. Prejudice against them was common. This is what natives under Ottoman rule would face. Still, there were no massacres, there was no forced conversion, and there was no record of genocide among the Ottomans until very late. I'll return to that in a moment. Ottomans also had the Janissaries. These were Christian slave boys who were converted, raised, and then paid, and personally loyal to the Sultan. They were his fanatic, dedicated soldiers. There probably would be native versions of the Janissaries, loyal to the Ottomans. As Europeans started to colonize and invade, they would do so in the Americas also. But under this, they would, just like under a Muslim Spain conquest, face natives with immunity to their diseases, guns and armors about or almost equal to Europeans. Europeans still might conquer the Americas, but again it would take much longer. Again, just like Africa and Asia are still almost all African and Asian peoples, the Americas would be too. And again, I count that as a native victory. Dozens of native nations with almost all native peoples today in the 21st century. What finally did happen to the Ottomans is that they were defeated in World War I. Their empire was taken away, broken up, and they became the nation of Turkey. In the aftermath, this new Turkish nation carried out several very vicious genocides of Armenians, Assyrians, Greeks, and Kurds. If any of the Americas were still under Ottoman rule at the end of their empire, or if any natives were still in Turkey when this empire ends, it's very possible they could be subject to genocide too. This is the end of the second video. I look forward to your comments and questions, and I will answer them as often as I can. But racism, genocide denial, childish behavior, or personal attacks will get deleted. But I do recognize that some questions will be asked in ignorance, because much of the facts I point to are new to most people. They were never taught about this. They've been raised in denial since denying indigenous genocides is taught in almost all public schools. Next time we will discuss the Chola Empire of India, and if there had been a Viking or Viking native state in North America. Please repost freely, like, share, and comment. I will post again in about a week. This has been What If Natives Won video blog and channel.